cops are banging at the door. It's about 1:30 in the morning. They're still banging on the door.
Law enforcement can be sued.
I told them over and over again, they're at the wrong address. They keep yelling out 4663, and that is the wrong address. They are not at the right place. And they will not stop. They have not told me what they're here for. They've been banging on my door since 1:30 a.m. It's now 2 o'clock a.m. They have still not told me what they're here for, and they're threatening to break into my home.
It's harassment. I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything.
Mommy.
I'm a Christian woman. I haven't done
What are you doing? What are you doing? We're not doing anything. Please stop. We're not doing anything. Stop. What are you doing?
I am in my apartment, sir.
Go back inside right now!
I am inside. This is my door. I'm standing right inside my apartment. Sir, I'm inside my apartment.
In Arizona, Jose Greene, a Marine who served 2 tours in Iraq, was asleep in his bed.
He awoke to the sound of his wife, Vanessa, screaming. After telling his wife and youngest son to hide in the closet, Greene grabbed his military weapon and walked out to the hallway. Police, who were conducting a drug raid, shot 71 bullets and hit Greene, who had never disengaged his safety, 22 times.
As he lay on the floor, bleeding, Vanessa called 911.
A bunch of people outside of my house. I don't know what the heck is happening. Okay, go ahead. I need a Who is outside your home? I need to know who is outside your home. Can you look out the window? I think it's the squad, but they're... Oh my God. So can you please open the door for them? It's open. They're opening.
Paramedics then came, but the police wouldn't allow them to treat her husband for more than an hour. The police said they had to secure the scene, and in that time, the Marine bled to death.
Even after this raid happened, the police department admitted that if he had survived, they didn't find anything they could arrest him for. They found no evidence of a crime, when they searched the house.
This, too, was a drug charge, and they didn't find any evidence of drug dealing in the house. Another example, this one from Missouri. Again, it's a SWAT team that got a tip about drug dealing. Drug raids like this one happen in America more than 100 times every day. On this raid, a SWAT team broke into this family's house, shot their dog. Once inside, they didn't find any drugs. The owner was just charged with possessing drug paraphernalia.
And now we're seeing a complete totalitarian takeover of the United States of America. And we've been talking about this for years now. This is the police state. This is the police state. This is what a total breakdown of our society looks like. But we're seeing all of this intensify. This is all intensifying around the Second Amendment. Should we be able to own guns or not? Let's take guns away from the people. These are very big, very hardcore issues.
I've also asked the school board to make a part of every day some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
Good evening from New Orleans. Here, the police and the National Guard find themselves in a very difficult position tonight to try to carry out an order to force people from the city without actually using force.
Today in New Orleans, they got a lot tougher on the holdouts.
Police department, anyone home?
Not only the flooded areas, but New Orleans' driest and wealthiest neighborhoods, too. The police and National Guard going street by street, house to house.
We need to make sure, too, that whenever we knock on the doors, people refuse to leave, we need to make note, call it in.
They say there are no orders to use force, just strong persuasion, sometimes entering open houses with guns drawn, and instructions to disarm anyone inside.
You say guns will be taken? No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
That happened today in this wealthy neighborhood where homeowners had armed themselves to protect their mansions. Residents were handcuffed on the ground. In the end, police took their weapons but let them stay in their homes.
They were a little bit threatened because our weapons were bigger than their weapons.
For many of the police and guard troops, it is an uncomfortable job to do this in an American city. This guard unit occupied a church, using it as a base camp. They had to leave a note because they could not get hold of the pastor to get permission.
It is surreal. Yeah, you never expect to do this in your own country.
Chris Montgomery says he'd rather be in Iraq than patrolling American neighborhoods.
Walking up and down these streets, you don't want to think about the stuff that you're gonna have to do. If somebody pops around the corner.
Let me shoot her in America.
Yeah.
Let me shoot her in America.
Yeah.
Let me shoot her in America.
Yeah.
The 29 Palm survey, ending with question 46, with the scenario that the government has banned all non-sporting firearms and that the American citizens in possession of these firearms have 30 days to turn them over to the local authorities. At the end of this period of time, several citizen groups form that refuse or resist the confiscation of these firearms banned by the U.S. government. Marines were asked whether or not they would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse or resist the confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. And I found this very difficult to swallow. 11% opted with the no opinion response. Had no opinion? Firing on their own fellow Americans? Of the remaining 26.34% answered that they would fire on their fellow Americans, U.S. citizens, who refused or resisted the confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government.
My last question is, the Department of Homeland Security recently bought 1.6 billion bullets, 7,000 rifles, and riot gear. Why does Homeland Security need these weapons of war against the people?
They have no answer for that question. They refuse to answer that. I've got a list of questions of various agencies about multiple things. Far from being the most transparent administration in the world, they are the most closed-nature, opaque, and they refuse to let us know what's going on there. So I don't have an answer for that. Multiple members of Congress are asking those questions. But it comes down to it. During the budget process, during the appropriations process, are we willing to hold DHS's feet to the fire? We're going to find out. If we get an answer, right, I say we don't fund them until we get an answer.
Yeah, they're complaining about the sequester, but buying $50 million new uniforms, which is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, there's plenty of waste going on, plenty of areas that can make those cuts, and obviously those type of things really challenge Americans. They're worried about this administration.
Homeland Security has bought over 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition. Some of this purchase order is for hollow point rounds, forbidden by international law for use in war, along with a frightening amount specialized for snipers. At the height of the Iraq War, for example, the Army was expanding less than 6 million rounds a month on ammunition. Therefore, 1.6 billion rounds would be enough to sustain a hot war for 20+ years in the United States. Why would the Department of Homeland Security need all these bullets? According to other reports, the DHS has also purchased over 2,700 mine-resistant armored protected vehicles, MRAPs. These military tanks have been retrofitted for service on the streets of the United States. Could the DHS be gearing up for civil unrest in the streets of America? Also, in a recent report first leaked by Aaron Hawkins of StormCloudsGathering, internment camps for political dissidents in the U.S. aren't a conspiracy theory. The Department of Defense document entitled Internment and Resettlement Operations, or FM 3-39.40, proves this beyond a shadow of a doubt. This report, first published in 2010 but not leaked until now, clearly suggests the U.S. government is preparing political dissidents for concentration camps, much like occurred with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066, where the president ordered the unlawful imprisonment of innocent Japanese Americans during World War II. Like FDR, is President Barack Obama preparing for war? Could recent bank runs in Cyprus be signaling contagion that is soon to spread to the rest of Europe and eventually result in a financial collapse here in the United States? Is the president, along with the Federal Reserve, front-running one of the most giant Ponzi schemes and catastrophic financial meltdowns in the history of the world? Will the recently passed National Defense Authorization Act be used to imprison innocent Americans without trial and jury? Will Obama's 23 executive orders to ban guns in the United States be used to disarm the American people before the outbreak of war?
Big government Republicans and Democrats were busy shredding the last vestiges of the Constitution. Senators John McCain and Carl Levin want to enact a law that would declare the entire United States of America a battlefield for the military. They're talking about inserting the Army into domestic law enforcement. Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports this bill, says, quote, "The homeland is part of the battlefield, and people can be held without trial, whether an American citizen or not." I guess he hasn't read the Constitution recently.
Know good and well that someday there could be a government in power that is shipping its citizens off for disagreements. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are suspected by these activities, do you want to have the government have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for indefinite detention? A suspect. We're not talking about someone who has been tried and found guilty. We're talking about someone suspected of activities. But some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house. Is that enough? I would argue that we should strike these detainee provisions from this bill because we are giving up our liberty. We are giving up the constitutional right to have due process before we're sent to a prison. This is very important. I think this is a constitutional liberty we should not look at and blithely sign away to the executive power or to the military. So I would call for support of the amendment that will strike the provisions on keeping detainees indefinitely, particularly the fact that we could now for the first time send American citizens to prisons abroad. I think that is a grave danger to our constitutional liberty, and I advise a vote to strike these provisions from the bill. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back my time.
Martino from Epsom. Thank you. You don't need this. You really don't. I was a colonel. I'm a retired colonel in the Marine Corps. I saw a sign back there that said, we want more Mayberry and less Fallujah. And I spent a year in Fallujah. And you know what? When I first got there, I didn't have armored Humvees, and I traveled over 10,000 miles over there. And sometimes you got to deal with and go with what you have. And so that's part of the job, for one. The second thing is, when I was in Iraq, I was in charge, I was the Ministry of Defense Coordinator. My job was to man, train, and equip the Iraqi army in Al-Anbar, Najaf, Karbala, and northern Babia provinces. And I can tell you right now, well, somebody had the great idea to get rid of the Iraqi army, so when we rebuilt it, we did everything we could to make it as strong as possible. And I'll tell you right now, Homeland Security would kick their butts in a week. What's happening here is we're building a domestic military because it's unlawful or unconstitutional to use American troops on American soil. So what we're doing is we're building a military. My best friend, who's a SWAT officer in Nashua, who came to Iraq with me to train the Iraqi police, sent me an email with a picture of him in the media on the streets of Watertown, Mass, wearing the exact same combat gear that we had in Iraq, only it was a different color. And the way we do things in the military is called task organization. You take a command and then you attach units to it in order to accomplish the mission. What's happening is Homeland Security is pre-staging gear, equipment, consistent. What they're trying to do is use standardized vehicles, standardized equipment. I saw a picture in the Boston Globe during the marathon bombing where there was a state police officer, actually there were two officers, they both had identical helmets, flak jackets, weapons, everything I wore in Iraq, only it was all blue. The officer on one side had a big patch on his back that said Massachusetts State Police. Another officer next to him, his patch said Boston Police. And so what we're doing here, and let's not kid about it, we're building a domestic army and we're shrinking the military because the government is afraid of its own citizens. The last time more than 10 terrorists were in the same place at one time was September 11th, and all these vehicles in the world wouldn't have prevented it, nor would it have helped anybody. So I don't know where we're going to use this many vehicles and this many troops. Concord is just one little cog in the wheel. We're building an army over here, and I can't believe that people aren't seeing it. Is everybody blind? That's all. I'll take it.
If you need a painted picture of what is happening in this country, let's recognize how history repeats itself. In February 1933, Hitler staged a false flag attack, burning down his own German parliament building, the Reichstag, and blamed it on communist terrorists. In the next few weeks, he passed the Enabling Act, which completely eradicated the German Constitution, destroying people's liberties. He then led a series of preemptive wars, all justified to the German people as necessary to maintaining homeland security.
Over the past decade, the U.S. government has been radically transformed. These transformations began with the Patriot Act passed by Bush in 2001, and they were further consolidated by Obama with the NDAA of 2012 and 2013. The contents of these laws were ominous warnings of what was coming, but for the average American, the changes that were taking place had little effect on their lives. The introduction of the Department of Homeland Security and the invasive new policies of the TSA and airports were uncomfortable, but for most of the population, it wasn't worth resisting. We heard stories of the government listening to people's phone conversations and searching houses without warrants, but this was all behind the scenes and it didn't really affect the population at large, so the outcry was limited. Occasionally, the mainstream media mentioned the extraordinary rendition and torture of suspected terrorists in military prisons, but of course these political pundits did their best to convince you that this was all justified and necessary for your security. Then Obama came onto the scene, promising hope and change, but it didn't take long for him to start showing his true colors when he renewed the Patriot Act and backed out of his promise to close Guantanamo. When Obama signed the NDAA giving the military the power to detain anyone, including U.S. citizens, indefinitely and without trial, and when he claimed the right to kill U.S. citizens without trial domestically or abroad, there was some outrage. But this outrage faded as new headlines pulled your attention away. On the surface, it might have started to seem like none of this was going to affect your life, so you put it out of your mind. If you were paying attention, you might have noticed that things were changing little bit by little bit. Cameras started appearing everywhere. The police began to be militarized, and drones began to patrol the skies domestically. But behind the scenes, something even bigger was afoot. Biometric information began to be collected from nonviolent protesters when arrested, from all immigrants entering the country, from school children without their parents' permission, and even from the public at large without their knowledge. The government has been collecting that information, compiling it into the largest biometrics database in the world. This database, referred to as NGI, will be online in 2014. These laws have been building the mechanisms for a totalitarian police state piece by piece, and now they're attempting to put the final measures in place. The new proposed immigration bill, called the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act, which is up for debate this summer of 2013, adds the two final elements. The first is a provision for a federal employment database that all workers will have to be approved through in order to get a job. This database will tie into other government databases at the discretion of the DHS, and the DHS is given the authority to unilaterally increase the identification requirements at will, and to demand that these standards be enforced as a condition of employment. What this means is that once this is in place, if the DHS decides that all ID cards must contain iris scan information and fingerprints, you'll have to give it to them or you won't be allowed to work. This in itself is a major power grab, but the full implications of the NGI database combined with this new employee identification system goes far beyond the workplace. In the immigration bill, there's a provision to set up a biometric scanning system in all international airports for departures. This system, which is proposed to roll out over the next 6 years, is initially just targeting immigrants. But once the system is in place, it would be trivial to start using it for the entire public. Such a switch wouldn't even need to be announced, since developments in biometric technology enable identification from a distance. They can do this with software connected to security cameras using facial recognition, infrared iris scanners, and even the rhythm of one's walk. Identification by one's unique patterns of movement, referred to as gait recognition, can even be used with drones. Once the biometrics verification system is set up at all ports of entry and departure, connecting this to the NGI database, existing surveillance cameras, and domestic drones to track the movements of ordinary citizens anywhere and everywhere, including wilderness areas, could happen without any outwardly visible changes and without any new laws. One of the most significant hallmarks of a police state is the establishment of systems to control who can leave a country. Such systems are often used to prevent political dissidents from escaping. This is often combined with intensive surveillance internally, both of communications and personal activities, and a brutal police force that operates above the law. Never in history has any dictatorship in the world had a system of surveillance, tracking, and exit management as sophisticated and powerful as the one the United States is about to finish setting up. Never. The Soviets had elaborate borders with double barbed wire, minefields, and guard towers, but none of this compares to a border patrolled by high-tech drones linked to the world's largest biometric database, with biometric scanners at every point of entry or departure. If they get this through, they will have truly outdone George Orwell. But the government would never abuse this power, would they? After all, America is the world's greatest beacon of hope and freedom, right? Well, the fact that the US government has already established a massive and secretive no-fly list, and the fact that anti-war activists have already been placed on this list for political reasons, should be considered a warning sign. In its current form, it's already impossible for citizens to find out if their names are on the list, and there's no process for getting your name removed from the list. What happens when the no-fly list becomes the no-leave list? So here's the real question. Do you trust the US government with this power? Do you actually believe that their primary goal is to protect you? If so, you haven't been paying attention. In 2013, we've been given a little glimpse of what's coming to America. In the Dorner case, we had a man accused of murder and condemned by the media as guilty based on a typed manifesto that he had supposedly written, even though there was no real evidence that Dorner had written the manifesto at all. A nationwide manhunt was put into motion, whole highways were roadblocked and cars were searched, police moved through neighborhoods searching hundreds of houses without warrants, and drones were said to have been deployed to hunt for him. And in the end, the police intentionally set fire to the building that he was supposedly hiding in, burning the man to death. The police initially denied that they set the fire, but later they were forced to admit that they had, due to a police scanner audio that got out to the public. And they got away with it. No one in the mainstream media or the government even blinked. Then we saw the Boston bombing case where two suspects were hunted down with equally tenuous evidence, even though photos from the event showed a number of individuals that were clearly involved. These other individuals were never mentioned by the authorities or the mainstream media. All attention was placed on the Sarnoff brothers as if they were already proven guilty. The manhunt to catch these two boys was unprecedented. The DHS rolled down the streets with military-grade armored vehicles, searching house to house with no warrants, instituting an improvised form of martial law on the fly, just like that, because they could. The Sarnoff brothers were finally caught, and they were shown in footage being arrested alive and well. Yet somehow, hours later, they were both shot full of holes. The older brother died, The other was left unable to speak, and the government and the mainstream media were silent. But the story didn't end there. Ibrahim Todashev, a friend of the Tsarnaev brothers, was brutally murdered by the FBI just weeks later. He was shot 6 times in the body and once in the back of the head. Murdered in cold blood, execution style. Todashev was unarmed, but the agents claimed that he attacked them. It's hard to imagine what an unarmed man could do to deserve a bullet in the back of the head. All of this establishes a new precedent, where the US government chases down suspects with militarized manhunts, instituting martial law on a whim, and acting as judge, jury, and executioner in the field. They kill with impunity based on flimsy or non-existent evidence, all with the support of a mainstream media circus that televises the whole event for your entertainment. This in itself is a chilling shift in tone, but believe it or not, there's more. A Department of Defense document entitled Internment and Resettlement Operations, also known as FM 3-39.40, was leaked this year, revealing detailed plans for the establishment of military internment camps within the United States. The document clearly calls for the collection of social security numbers, meaning it will be used for U.S. citizens. And it even has diagrams for 3 different types of camps that are to be implemented. These diagrams show interrogation rooms, guard towers spread throughout the facilities, and double barbed wire surrounding the camps. We covered this document in detail in our video entitled Leaked Document, Military Internment Camps in the U.S. to be Used for Political Dissidents. But wait, there's more. The Department of Homeland Security has recently gone on a bullet buying spree, purchasing over 1.6 billion rounds in just a few months. And even after the mainstream news started covering it, the DHS ordered more bullets. A large percentage of these bullets are hollow points and buckshot and cannot be used by the military. And the DHS only operates domestically. The DHS claims these bullets are to be used for training purposes, but anyone who knows anything about guns knows that you don't use hollow points for training. Hollow points are much more expensive than FMJ. Furthermore, this is more ammunition per DHS officer than US soldiers have been using in the war. In parallel, we had Senator Coburn release a paper about the wasteful spending in the DHS, in which he pointed out a bizarre training exercise where the DHS practiced shooting civilians who were disguised as zombies. Coburn focused on the spending aspect, but if you watch the actual footage and put it into context with everything else, the real purpose of these training exercises is much more disturbing. DHS officers are being conditioned to fire on unarmed civilians. The zombie makeup is just a smokescreen. Believe it or not, this is only a fraction of the evidence that we can present here. There is much more that you'll find if you do your own research. As outlandish as this picture may look to you if this is the first time that you've encountered this information, the reality is that from a historical perspective, nothing we're showing here is unusual at all. Countries slip into totalitarian dictatorships all the time. You've just been conditioned to believe that it could never happen in America. But it can happen in America. And it is happening. It's happening right now. There are 3 ways of dealing with what you've just seen. You can pretend that this is all a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but to do that, you'll have to ignore the extensive documentation given from mainstream sources. Some might call this skepticism, but the more accurate term is willful ignorance. Option number 2, you can cower in fear and do everything in your power to avoid attracting the attention of the government. Of course, that's your prerogative, but what are you going to say to your children and grandchildren when they ask you what you did when this went down? Or, option number 3, you can fight to stop this. The powers that be have an Achilles heel, and that's the enforcers. These DHS officers are your fellow Americans. Most of them are not evil. They're just misinformed and perhaps a little brainwashed by their training. You can reach out to them, make friends with them, show them this information. You can reach out to police and military, to current serving and veterans alike. Make them understand what's coming. Make them realize that they've been tricked, and that they are being used to destroy their own country. If the powers that be lose control of their enforcement arm, it will be game over for these criminals.
When you entrust a man with the public trust, and you know that he's human, and you don't want him to run amok, you bind him down with an oath. I know we heard talk today about someday you may see those in the uniform, in violation of their oaths, pointing the gun at you, their masters, in an unlawful way. I pray that never happens. It has happened. I want to assure you, the man in the uniform will not be I.
Today, really, in many respects, our government
is the one that is stepping aside the rule of law.
Gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans.
The social controllers are very scared of police and military rediscovering their oath of office.
I will not obey orders to impose martial law.
I will not obey.
They understand that throughout history, tyranny comes to your door in a uniform.
We will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people.
I will not obey.
Think of every instance you can think in history where republics have fallen through usurpation of power. Particularly think of the times when it has happened through the military force run amok.
You can't really tell from my name, but my father lived under Stalin, and his whole family was killed by Stalin. And my mother's family escaped from North Korea, and they lost all their property and were supposed to be killed at least 3 or 4 times. So I was fortunate to be born in this great nation, and but yet I see the same signs or our country going in the direction in which my parents escaped from.
U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil.
We will not obey any orders to force American citizens into any form of detention camps under any pretext.
I will not obey.
To what degree are we any more mindful of oaths?
If we had law enforcement in America keeping their oath to do just that, we would have our constitutional republic back tomorrow. That's how powerful this movement is.
I'm Garrett Lear, the Patriot pastor. This is where the battle was fought, right here in the Lexington Battle Green. This is sacred ground. This is one of the most important pieces of real estate in the history of America. This is where it happened, and this was the shot basically heard around the world, and still being heard around the world, I think. I grew up in the town of Lexington, standing on the green, playing on the green. When I was a boy growing up, my mother told me about our ancestry, and so I started to go on the village green in Lexington, but didn't pay a whole lot of attention except to the statue of John Parker. Everyone could look up to him because he wasn't white, he wasn't brown, he wasn't red, he wasn't yellow, he wasn't black, he's green, actually. So anyone could identify with him, and I said, one day when I grow up, I want to be like him. Welcome to Lexington, the cradle of American liberty. Most people don't know really what happened at the Battle of Lexington, but basically what happened was the night before the battle, that would have been April 18th, riders came in, that's the midnight ride of Paul Revere. It was actually John Dawes that did it, and a man named Prescott, because Paul Revere was interdicted by the British troops. But they were bringing a message from Dr. Warren and the committees of correspondence and the committees of safety in Boston to tell them, looks like the British are mounted troops here, and we're not exactly sure what they're trying to do. They're probably going to go after the munitions that are in Concord, but they're probably going to try to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock and either send them back to England in chains or shoot them right there or something. And basically when the British came, it was obvious that they had some bad plan. The Minutemen, the militia, the regulated militia, did not want to engage the British troops in a fight. And so these men stood their ground when they were told, you are to drop your weapons and disband. Well, they started to disband, but they would not drop their weapons because they were militia. And what happened when they started to disband, they got fired on. The first shot that was fired by the British regulars. It was not fired by the Minutemen. It was not fired by the colonists. It was not fired by the people of Lexington. And we can find that in the narrative of Jonas Clark, the pastor. 8 of them got shot and killed. Many were bayoneted. Some died later of wounds. Many were wounded. But 8 died on this green. But they stopped the British as they were on their march to Concord. And they did what was right. This was a principled stand for freedom, and we're doing the same thing today.
We will not obey orders to disarm the American people.
I will not obey.
Well, today we're here on the green at Lexington, April 19th, which is the anniversary of April 19, 1775, which was the first shot and fired the American Revolution. I'm Stuart Rhodes, the founder of Oath Keepers, which is a nonpartisan Association of Current Serving Military, Police, and Veterans, all of us who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. And our mission is to make sure that all of the other oath takers are oath keepers.
Gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil.
We've had critics that say, well, what are you guys talking about? Of course I'm going to keep my oath. I find it offensive that you'd even suggest that a military officer or a police officer would not keep the oath. And we say, hey, we got one word for you, Katrina. Okay? Look at what happened there. And so we want to make sure there are no more Katrinas. We don't want any more of that.
My name's Sergeant Charles Dyer. I'm an oath keeper. I'm with the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion out of Camp Pendleton, California. I absolutely could not, I can't imagine that we're living in the times where I have to worry about having to confiscate the weapons from the American people. Is that freedom? It's absolutely not freedom. That I have to worry that we're gonna quarantine a city for the purposes of keeping them in their hostage, like Katrina? Absolutely not. That's not freedom in any way that you can think of it. I'm almost speechless whenever I try to talk about this because I can't imagine that we're living in this kind of time. It really bothers me. Absolutely.
Because of the quotation March 11th, 1993 by President Clinton, because of the Clinton assault weapons ban that was being enacted, I formed a scenario that I knew would be explosive, shouldn't have been, but because of the times and the machinations of certain forces to disarm the American people.
I don't care whether it's your governor or your senator or your representative or your president. I'm sure you can look at instances, days within having sworn his oath, the person violates it blatantly. That's a dangerous thing.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
None of this stuff would be happening if it is stuck with the Constitution and stuck within its parameters.
And we learned the American dream, and we wrote that doing that American dream and working, and we were electing representatives that we felt were going to represent us while we were doing other things and maintaining our families and raising our families and doing the right thing as we thought. And I think we were duped in some cases where they've actually let us down.
I saw a tremendous pattern of the growth of the infrastructure of a totalitarian state in the last 8 years post 9/11. I mean, it's been going on for decades. We've seen for decades encroachments on our liberties, and then a crisis would come along, and then all of a sudden they had a chance to get their policies passed they've been wanting to pass for a long time. That's what I saw as just incredibly alarming. And it's just the concept of enemy combatant status itself is an extension of that. And when I was writing at Yale, I wrote a paper on enemy combatant status. It won their award for best paper on the Bill of Rights. And unfortunately, when Obama was elected, he didn't repeal any of those things. And he's left that in place, which is the pattern of all presidents. Whether it's a left boot or a right boot on the back of your neck, we just don't want the boot on the back of our neck.
He stands on that office on the condition of that oath, and the safety valve that he takes is refusing to violate it.
When you swore an oath to defend the Constitution, you took upon yourself an individual obligation to make your own decision on the spot of where that line is and whether an order is lawful or unlawful. You have an obligation to do so, and as the Nazis found out at Nuremberg, just following orders is no excuse.
95% of the church, Christian church, supported Hitler, which is terrifying to me. And so I think we need to really wake up and not assume that our fellow citizens won't hurt us.
I would say to any pastor or anyone in the military, should we have a breakdown in things in this country, stay by your Bible and stay by the Constitution. Do those things. And remember that in the history of this world, the terrible debacle, from my perspective anyway, of what happened in Nazi Germany, when the church did not stand by those innocent people, the Jewish people who were exterminated for no other reason than being Jewish.
My God, how did we ever allow our government to reach such a point.
What's happening to the United States is very, very sad. It's sad because we've seen it done to third world nations over and over and over again.
I would like to ask that all of you just take a moment, take a deep breath, and realize the solemn nature of this occasion, because those of you who so choose will be swearing an oath. Pretty serious proposition.
You'll never have anything in your life that's as valuable as your word. So just remember that. If we all do nothing more than fulfill our oath, then we can turn things around just on that alone.
Because it only takes a few relatively faithful servants to diffuse a lot of mischief in times of crisis, if they merely hold to their oath.
If you can't swear that oath, please mentally excuse yourself and don't participate, because I, for one, intend to honor this oath, because we're in perilous times. Not quite so perilous, or perhaps far more perilous than in 1775. Please raise your hand thusly, and when you hear me say "I," pronounce your own name. I, Larry Bailey, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I take this obligation freely. Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. So help me God. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to our great fraternity.
Oath Keepers, an association of active duty military, police officers, and veterans, all of us who swore the oath and will keep our oath and will honor our oath. If you swore an oath to defend the Constitution, honor your oath by joining us, the Oath Keepers, and become an Oath Keeper.